Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the AML Clinic. Today we are starting with a topic that's as uncomfortable as it is critical, and that's how law firms can be used to launder money. And whether you're a seasoned solicitor or just starting out, understanding the vulnerabilities in legal services is essential to protecting your practice and, of course, your reputation. Joining me today is Graham Mackenzie, one of the UK's leading voices in anti-money laundering. He's the director of AML and financial crime at Amicus. Graham spent 8 years as head of AML at the Law Society of Scotland, where he helped shape national policy and guidance for the legal sector. He's worked closely with government, law enforcement, and financial institutions, contributing to key initiatives like the UK's National Economic Crime Plan and the FATF's mutual evaluation of the UK in 2018. Graham brings a wealth of experience and insight into how law firms can protect themselves against financial crime. I'm delighted to have you on the podcast, Graham. Thank you for being here.
And thank you for inviting me, Michelle, especially to the first inaugural one.
Yes.
It's a pleasure to be here, and hopefully I will have a few things to be able to say about this, and your listeners will find it informative and valuable. So thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, Graham. Certainly hope so.
I thought I should also say, two ex-regulators unite as well. So yeah.
Yes, exactly. I was literally just going to say that our paths has crossed several times as regulators, so it's actually quite nice to be here as non-regulators.
We came through the other side, Michelle,
Yes, we
unscathed,
have.
just about.
To kick off the discussion, Graham, I wanted to start with one of your LinkedIn posts. And I'll just describe it for those who probably aren't on your LinkedIn and haven't seen it. It was a picture of a small bag with some white substance on the floor. But quite disturbingly in that picture was, in the background, was the picture of your children's school. So just for those who weren't on your LinkedIn, can you please tell us what the picture depicted? Why did you make that post? And how is it relevant to the legal sector?
Okay, of course I'll do so. But I would say, if you're not on my LinkedIn, please do follow me or reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd love to be able to converse with you on that platform. So please do so. Look, this was a post that I put on a few weeks ago, actually, and yeah, as you described, I was walking my two kids to school. I've got two boys, both at primary school. One's 10, one's 7. And I walked them across to their school in the morning, and I kind of looked down at the ground, and here's this wee white drugs bag, basically, sitting right outside the primary school gates. And I'm really all for trying to establish the kind of the link and the causal link between the work that regulated professionals do and the underlying root criminality. And I think that really speaks to people and helps people understand why we do risk assessments, why we do due diligence, why we do source of funds, source of wealth, why we do all these things that are required of us through the money laundering regulations. Because ultimately, I was trying to establish through that post the link between what we do and the criminality in our local communities and our local societies, and the impact that has. It's unfortunately just the way of it in this modern world, that these things will happen. And this, I live in a relatively small town in West Lothian in Scotland. I don't live in the inner city or whatever. And it happens in drugs are a scourge that happens in every community, rural, urban, Scotland, England, Wales, Northern Ireland. And I wanted to just bring it home to people that the work they do in the regulated profession does have an impact. And I think it was crazy, actually, because, I've been pretty prolific on LinkedIn for many years. And as a regulator, there's a lot of people I interacted with through that channel.
Mm.
But this post, it was incredible. It kind of went, I'm not saying I'm the Mr. Beast of LinkedIn, anything but, yeah, but it kind of went viral. For me anyway. I mean, I think it was about 135,000 people saw that, which is
Amazing.
incredible.
Mm.
And I had about 25 reshares. I had 660 odd likes on it, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because it really spoke to people. And
Yes.
people, certainly in our industry, appreciated it, and it brought home to them that actually the work they do hopefully does have an impact, and there's a reason for the work they do. Because it's,
Exactly.
as we all know, in this space, it can be a lonely space, right?
Yeah.
You're kind of on your own in many ways, and it it is really important that people understand the importance of their work.
Yes. And I can agree with you completely. I think, again, from a regulator's perspective, I think sometimes people miss the why. And I can completely understand why, because, from working at the SRA, I obviously was only focused on AML. But as a law firm, you have so many competing interests. You're dealing with confidentiality, client account rules. You're actually trying to deliver a service. You're actually trying to do the work that the client has instructed you on. You're dealing with HMRC. I can completely understand that. But I think sometimes it just boils down as a tick box exercise. We've got the driver's license and utility bill. We've done our ID check, but it's not really fully appreciating the impact it has on our communities, like you said.
I would also
So
say that there, in recent years, and you'll know this yourself, there's been so much emphasis being put on high-end money laundering in this country,
yeah,
and Russian oligarchs
yes,
and kleptocracy,
yes,
etc. And for many solicitors, I could never say never. It could affect any solicitor or any
mm,
regulated profession, high end stuff. Of course, it can, but actually what really matters to people on the ground in high street conveyancers and smaller practices up and down the land is the impact it has on their local communities, and
mm,
it's more cash-based money laundering, and
yes,
the effect of drugs and human trafficking and
yes,
stuff like that, which happens again in every community across the land. So, and
yes,
that's something I'm really passionate about. There's loads of stuff goes on in the high end money laundering space, and
hmm,
you have headlines in the Guardian and wherever else, and
hmm,
there's loads of kind of third sector organisations that do loads of really really good work on high end money laundering threats. But something that I feel as though certainly has gone a wee bit unchecked in recent years is the rise of Turkish barbers. It's the rise
mm,
of
candy
sweetie
shop,
shops and street
yeah,
corners, all that sort of stuff that everybody sees as they walk down the high street. And if they look behind that, the shiny facades of
yes,
these shops, they start to understand that actually all they are money laundering sinks in many cases. And that's the stuff that really interests me actually as a money anti-money laundering professional. And it's something that actually I think touches people more than these distant,
the
far off.
high end, yes, it can never happen to us type cases. Yes, I
Yeah,
agree
exactly.
100%. Yes.
Yeah.
Every time I go past a chip shop and there's a Lamborghini parked outside, it always piques my interest. NCA, where are
Well,
you?
yeah, yeah. Or you get these kind of people who are kind of lingering outside these shops, and you wonder, well, why are they there? And
Hmm.
when you see, or if you're looking into doing your due diligence, and there's umpteen directors or kind of controllers
Hmm.
of a small Turkish barbers. Why is that? Because they're all involved in that, and it doesn't take
Mm,
five directors to run a Turkish barber. You know what I
mm,
mean?
yes,
So those are things which really impact us all in society. And I think, yeah, I'm glad to see actually there's some movement. It feels as though there is some movement in law enforcement and HMRC lately on this. There seems to be a pivot back
mm,
towards looking at this cash-based money laundering, which
yes,
I mean, huge amount to do, but I think that at least there's there's impetus there to start to look at these sort of things again through government, which is great news.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I think that's a really good segue into us actually going into some of the ways that money launderers and can target law firms. So I, I'm
Yeah,
I'm hoping we're not going to teach any money launderers how to launder money, but I think it's more from the perspective of what law firms should be mindful of and what they should be careful about, the red flags that they should be looking out for. So let's start with the
yeah.
most obvious one, conveyancing. So, just talk us through how can a money launderer use a law firm through a conveyancing transaction to launder the proceeds of their crime.
Yeah, okay. So if we start with why a money launderer criminal might want to use property as a
Okay.
way of laundering their ill-gotten gains. Well, property is often a high-value asset, right? So it
Yes.
offers the opportunity to, I guess, legitimize large amounts of cash in one go.
Hmm.
The value of property generally appreciates. Yeah, so this is unusual because criminals, when they're
Hmm.
laundering money, quite often will understand that they might lose some of that money through the laundering process,
Right.
but they have an opportunity through property not to do so, to actually get you in some circumstances actually make money from their laundering process as
Yeah.
well. Um, the nature of conveyancing, especially smaller conveyancing matters, etc. And I think this is actually one of the red flags that we'll go on to in a minute. But the nature of conveyancing, everyone wants it to happen really quickly. Yeah. So if you're a buyer or a seller, especially in a chain, you want things to move really quickly, right? Because you want
Yeah.
to move into your brand new house, or you want to sell your house very quickly so you can then move into your dream home, whatever it might be, or put a deposit down, whatever it is. Yeah. Um, that's a really good disguise, if you like, for money launderers who also want to move their money really quickly.
Yes.
Yeah. So that is, so if, and we'll go on to red flags, but if there is a situation where for no apparent reason someone is trying to get the transaction done really quickly and is hassling you, I mean, there will be many a circumstance where legitimate clients are trying to move the transaction on because they want to buy that house or move into that house, whatever it is.
Hmm.
But if there's in your eyes as a professional, as a legal professional, there is a bit of time here, but the client is still going at you to try and get it done quickly. Perhaps that could be a bit of a red flag. So
Hmm.
conveyancing is a market that does move quite quickly in some parts of the market, and that is
Hmm.
attracted to money launderers as well. There's loads of stuff happening. There's the use of client accounts,
Yes.
to move money. Um, there's a lot of kind of transactional activity associated with conveyancing, yeah,
Hmm.
and that's attractive to a money launderer as well, who ultimately wants to complicate the money trails involved. Yeah,
Yeah.
the more parts, moving parts, and the more the cash has to go this way,
Hmm.
and the documentation has to go that way,
Yes.
that obscures the underlying owner of the assets to a
Yeah.
degree as well, which helps a money launderer who ultimately wants to take 3 steps back away from the underlying assets, because that
Hmm.
means it puts some distance between themselves and the assets,
Hmm.
because that makes it more difficult for law enforcement to catch them ultimately. Yeah. If you buy property using illegitimate gains, if you like, you can also generate additional, I guess, quasi-legitimate income streams. So
Mm.
from rental, once you've
Very
bought that
attractive.
property, yeah, you can rent it out. Even money launderers need somewhere to live.
Yeah.
So that's attractive. Or and we've seen this. Unfortunately, we've seen this in Scotland a bit, and I'm sure it happens in all areas of the UK. Certainly in human trafficking cases,
Hmm.
well, money launderers or criminals need places for the people they've trafficked to stay. Um, usually in really crowded conditions, etc., etc. So we've seen that as well. So there's a whole myriad of reasons why, and hopefully by now, over the last few years, conveyancers, legal professionals understand more about the underlying rationale why property and conveyancing is. But I think it's always useful to go back on that. It's yeah. So
Yeah.
that's probably why conveyancing is so attractive.
Thank you, Graham. That was very aptly put. Exactly. Agree with absolutely everything you said there. So let's go on to talk about TCSP providers, so trust or company service providers.
Yeah.
So just to quickly break down what services we're talking about. So if you form a company, if you are a trustee for a trust, or you allow, or you're sort of arranging for somebody else to act as a trustee, if you're acting as a director or a secretary of a company, or arrange for somebody else to do that, if you're allowing your offices to be used for as a registered office address, business address, any type of correspondence or administrative address for your client, usually a company, a partnership, or any other legal, personal legal arrangement, then you are providing TCSP services. So tell us, Graham, why would a money launderer want to use a TCSP?
Again, it's really to obfuscate the source of assets, or put distance between themselves and assets. So it's all about transparency,
Mm,
and trying to ensure that there is distance between you and your ill-gotten gains, so you
yeah.
can use registered offices, for example, to ensure that you're again a step, two steps away. They can't link you to, and quite often they'll use a registered address, which, in fairness, quite often they may not use a legal professional for that.
Hmm.
They may use a mailbox, etc., whatever it
Hmm.
might be, one of those other services, instead, because it's really anonymous. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, for a registered, or they can, control their assets by proxy by using nominees, or
Yeah.
or other directors, etc. So their name's not associated with assets, etc.
Hmm.
Obviously, certainly in the UK, and there's a whole different podcast probably on the Economic Crime and Transparency Act, and all the
Yeah.
really good work that Companies House is doing at the moment in regards to cleaning up the register and whatnot. But ultimately, as we all know, and we've seen this through a myriad of different laundromats over the years, and it's, UK PLC is quite an attractive for a place for money launderers to set up shop, in terms of the ease of setting up a business, putting in nominees, putting in false details on the register, etc., etc. So it's all about trying to anonymize the transactions, yeah, and
Yeah.
taking a step away from your ill-gotten gains, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think what you just said there, that just sums it up perfectly. That is exactly what, money launderers want to do. And so like you said, why have they got a nominee director? Why is there a nominee shareholder? Does it make sense for this client, the client's profile, to be engaged in this type of transaction? Those are the basic questions that will lead us down the path of, right, okay, this doesn't necessarily make any sense. Let's move on to tax advice.
Well, ultimately, evasion of tax
Yeah.
is a criminal offence,
Yes.
and therefore, money that is derived from the evasion of tax in any way, shape, or form are then the proceeds of crime. Um, so
Yes.
you can become involved as a solicitor in money laundering by the provision of tax advice. Okay, if I can hand it back to you, Michelle, on this, because I know the SRA have done a whole heap of work on tax advice.
Yeah.
The LSA, not so much in recent years, but I think it's probably something which affects the English profession a wee bit more than the Scottish one. So,
Sure.
to be fair, I'm actually going to hand it back to you and get
Yeah.
your thoughts on that as well, Michelle.
You're right. So tax evasion is obviously a crime. So if you're providing tax advice that in a way facilitates that. Obviously, I'm not saying that solicitors are knowingly providing tax advice to help their clients evade tax, but in the process of doing so, you may inadvertently do. Tax advisors may also help with setting up things like trusts, which the SRA sectoral says the use of trust can be high risk, obviously depending on what they're doing. As you said, it could be a way to add complexities to a transaction. It depends on where
Yeah,
the trust is set up, because it could be a jurisdiction that's known for tax evasion. We can name quite a few of those, but again,
yeah,
probably another show altogether. So the use of offshore entities, where corporate transactions are layered, that again could be for tax reasons. There could be tax implications, and obviously these can be tools that can be misused for an owner to disguise and to move themselves away from their ill-gotten gains. So I think that's the reason that tax advice falls into the regulated sector. But this always draws some comments, and there are always views on opposing sides as to, well, if I'm just helping my client fill in an inheritance tax form, why should that be
yeah,
considered as tax advice? So there are arguments that I can see why on both sides.
yeah. Yeah, and I would say that, obviously, complex, especially complex tax structuring, and advice on structuring is the same sort of advice. I mean, it can be used perfectly legitimately to minimize
Yes,
tax for
yes,
clients, etc., etc. Yeah, but
absolutely.
those same types of tax structuring techniques can also be used for money laundering purposes.
Yeah,
So I think, because as you say, as we've just said, it's the same. The use of trust, the use of company structures, etc., to negate tax implications, but also it can be used to anonymize or distance yourself from ill-gotten gains as well. So, um, I think actually, to be fair, that's another podcast again entirely. Which is great. You've got a pipeline there,
yes.
Michelle.
Exactly. It's never ending. The gift that keeps on giving. I got
Yeah,
asked this at conference recently, and the question was in relation to probate, but it was more a source of funds question. It wasn't necessarily, why is this a regulated piece of service? But in relation to
yeah.
probate, do we really need to be doing checks where we're doing probate work? Because it seems like a really crappy way for someone to launder money is for them to wait to die. But I,
This
I was
is
just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Oh yeah, it's a bit of a thorny, but so I mean, like we could discuss whether it's executory or probate all day long. So probate
Yeah,
down south, executory up here. Um,
right.
so our view at the Law Society of Scotland was executory ultimately involves the formation of a trust. Yeah,
Okay.
um, and therefore it brings it into scope of the money laundering regulations north of the
hmm
border, certainly. And I don't know what the SRA's view is on that. To be honest, I'm sure
The,
you
the
do.
the view from the SRA was, if
Yep.
it's administration only, then that
Okay.
wasn't in scope because it didn't require the movement of any assets or anything. So literally, you were just writing to, I can't remember who's the body that deals with probate. This is quite bad. And just filling in the form. Then that's not in scope because no, you're not moving any assets. But once you're actually paying out from the estate to beneficiaries, then you are moving assets. That falls under Regulation 12. So
Right.
that therein lies the difference.
That's interesting because as I say, and I totally get that as well. But as I say, in Scotland, we formed the view that executive involved the formation of trust, and that's what it brought it into scope of Regulation 12. I
Mm,
mean, again, my view is that, yeah, because it is within scope of the money laundering regulations, well, then you must do a risk assessment, you must do CDD,
yes,
etc., etc. But I agree with you again that generally speaking, it's going to be pretty low risk. I mean, is there, for example, any adverse media?
mm,
You may, and I'm not saying you do this for standard clients, if you like, in
sure.
every case, but if you have a whiff or you have a sense that um, the individual who has passed away may have had links to
hmm
criminality in any way, which we are for, you may wish to do some adverse media checking around those individuals, because
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, yes, potentially by undertaking the executory, etc., on behalf of, for example, and this is in the we must add, this is in extremis, this is in
Yes.
unusual cases, right? So
Circumstances,
it's not
yes.
going to happen. Right? But if you were to do an executory on behalf of a known organised criminal, well, ultimately you could come in under scope of POCA, yeah,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
327 to 329 in my view.
Yes.
So yeah, you absolutely do want to do that risk assessment. You do want to do some due diligence around it, etc., because you don't want to
Mm-hmm.
be moving money, which you would have reasonable cause, if you like, to understand would be the proceeds of criminality, or could be. In general situations, that's not going to apply, right? But
Of course.
I think you have to have one eye on that.
Yes, absolutely. So my response was very similar to yours in the sense of, if you look at the person who's passed away, I don't know, what did they do? They were a teacher. Okay, they died with an estate of, I don't know, £200,000. Well, was it reasonable over the course of their life that they were able to save that amount of money? But I hadn't gone, oh, this person was a teacher. They died with a £10 million estate. Well, then questions need to be asked in that
Well,
crate. It's not
yeah,
reasonable.
exactly. Yeah. It's with so many of these things, and I'm a massive advocate of holistic due diligence. Yeah.
Yes.
What do I mean by that? Well, yeah, you need to absolutely do what the money laundering regulations stipulate you need to do in terms of IDV, CDD, etc. But like, take a step back. Does it make sense? And I think those sort of messages are starting to, or have been percolating through the legal profession. I
Mm.
put a LinkedIn post after the Law Society of England and Wales AML conference, and I think that the conversation has moved on. I think that generally speaking, legal professionals do now understand why they're doing this. Yeah,
Yes.
and you know. The implications of or what's going on behind the scenes, and why they could be involved in money laundering, and why they have to implement AML controls. And I think a lot of the discussion now is, and as we were talking about just now, is how do you do that? Yeah, how do you
Mm-hmm.
do it effectively? How do you do it efficiently, etc. And that's a really positive change, So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely agree, Graham. Okay, so let's move on to our Mythbuster section. So, something that I've heard a few times too often is that some firms think that because they don't have a client account, they might not be at risk of being used inadvertently to launder money. And could you bust that myth for us, please, Graham? Is that true?
Right, okay, let's bust that myth, right? So it's false, right? So I mean, and I done some work with it was Kaylee, shout out to Kaylee Smell, who operates in this space as well. She's
Hmm.
great what she does as well. And I've done some work with her around, done some videos on source of funds, and
Yes,
and
I've seen them. They're really
it was,
good. You guys should watch
yeah.
it.
Oh, thank you. So they're up in and I've got to plug Amicus as well. So if you can please,
Yeah, yeah.
it's up in the Amicus YouTube channel. So please do have a look at the Amicus YouTube channel as well. So in those videos, we discussed TCSP activity in terms of source of funds, and money is not, generally speaking, in TCSP activity, money is not flowing through your client account. Yeah. Can you still come a cropper, especially under POCA 327 to 329, facilitating
Hmm.
or moving money? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely you can. And we've talked about TCSP risks. Well, money isn't moving through the client account. Yeah. But ultimately, given that there are implications under the primary money laundering offences under POCA, I certainly would be, for example, in TCSP activity or other activity which may not flow through the client account, if
Yeah.
you're involved in an arrangement, etc., I would certainly be interested to know where the source of funds is coming from for a transaction, or if you're involved in setting up a company on behalf of a client, well, what is the expected cash flow of that company, where it's supposedly coming from? Does it make sense that it's coming from a particular place where actually when you've seen, for example, the business plans for that company, or you've been talking to the client, actually they had mentioned that the money was actually coming from across here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Or, they expected cash flow in the first year to be, I don't know, £500,000, and it's actually 5 million. Well,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, why? Why is that? So asking those questions in the context of the source of funds is paramount, even if money is not flowing to the client account. And indeed, those listeners, I'm sure many listeners will be well familiar with the LSAT guidance, right? But there is
Mm-hmm.
also LSAT guidance section 2B as well, or a different section, which is all
Mm-hmm.
about trust and company service provision, which again states as part of your risk assessment, etc., you should be looking at the source of funds involved. So yeah, so let's just bust that myth. When
Yes.
popular offences are real, yeah, I absolutely would be looking at source of funds, even if money is not flowing through your client account.
Fabulous. Thank you. Thank you so much, Graham. Appreciate that. And we've actually come to the end of this episode. So that's it for the AML Clinic
I
today.
have just to say, Michelle, we'd gone through a whole list of stuff you wanted to talk about, right?
We have.
And but we've only touched upon maybe a half or 2/3 of it. So I'm more than happy to come back another time and talk about the rest if you'd have me. So
You are absolutely welcome, Graham. So yes, please to that.
okay,
Absolutely.
absolutely. No
Yes,
worries at all,
definitely.
yes.
But a huge thank you to you, Graham, for sharing your insight and your experiences. If you are a solicitor, compliance officer, or anyone working in legal risk, I hope today's discussion has given you something practical to take back to your firm. And if you found the episode useful, consider sharing it with your colleagues who live in the world of nuance, risk, and razor thin judgment calls. And if you've got a topic you'd like me to cover, I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening to the AML Clinic. Until next time, stay informed and stay compliant.